Augustown chapter 5. Long after the last school bell has rung, Mr. Emmanuel St. Joseph's sits in his musty classroom of 2B as if rooted to his desk. Every 10 minutes or so, he feels the urge to get up and go home, but this is followed by an intense terror washing over his whole body. Beads of sweat gather like a sprinkle of morning dew on his forehead, and he has to settle right back into his seat. He knows that this terror is connected to the thing he did earlier, so instinctively he goes over the whole drama in as much detail as he can remember. It is therefore not the incident itself that is tiring, but this constant reliving of it, and his absolute inability to leave the scene. It is as if he is waiting on a repercussion, the shape of which he cannot yet discern. His reliving of the incident begins with the moment when he turned his back to the class. He had been writing out the 2 times table on the blackboard. He drew big and beautiful numbers. Blue chalk dust drifted down onto his arms and into his nose. He made snorting sounds as he tried not to sneeze. Imagining the children would be making a face at this, he turned round suddenly to keep them in order. He glared at them, and they grinned back at him. To the children, this sudden turning around by their teacher was something like a game of peekaboo. Mr. St. Joseph's grimaced and returned to the blackboard. He was a somewhat nervous man, and did not like having his back to the class. It made him feel exposed and vulnerable. It was a large class for just the one teacher. There were 3 rows of tables across and 4 back. Each desk seated 2 children. The walls of the classroom had been made with decorative blocks that someone probably thought would have let light in through the patterns, but this was not the case. It was a very dark classroom, the only illumination coming from the 2 long-tubed fluorescent lights overhead. Mr. St. Joseph's heard the distinct sound of giggling, and turned around again just in time to catch the Rastafari boy Kaya MacDonald whispering into the ear of the other little boy who sat beside him. The nerve, the teacher thought to himself, the outright nerve. Many hours later, he keeps on saying this in his head. The nerve, working himself up into a frenzy, pretending that the misdemeanor wasn't in fact as small and common as it in fact was. He has been expecting the principal to come storming in, but it seems certain now that Kaya has not actually gone to Mrs. Garrick's office, but instead has cried his way home. Mr. St. Joseph's imagines that he would have been ready to face the principal anyway. He had rehearsed a little speech in his mind. The boy was acting like a living hooligan, ma'am. A living hooligan, I say. And what else to expect? If we allow these little boys and girls to look and dress like any madman or madwoman walking on the road, no little tidiness about them, no little grooming, no little hygiene, then what else to expect? I had to take matters in hand, Mrs. G. And I warn you about this already. On my very first day, I come to your office and warn you. And this was true. On his first day of teaching, he had barged into the principal's office. Look here, Miss Garrick, he had begun at once. I expect my students to be properly put together and tidy. Yes, they must be tidy. We cannot be asking any less of these young gentlemen and women at such a crucial and impressionable age. Mrs. G had looked up, unable to hide the annoyance in her eyes. She took off her glasses slowly and put down the pen she had been writing reports with. Then she fixed the teacher with a withering look. Good morning, Mr. St. Joseph's. What is this about? Mr. St. Joseph's had stuttered. Miss Garrick. Mrs. Garrick, she corrected him. Mr. St. Joseph's sighed and rolled his eyes. Mrs. Garrick, he said with great affectation, I am here this morning in front of you to talk about the matter of decorum and good manners and tidiness, which it looked to me like the students here don't have. When I was deputy head teacher in a very upstanding school in Trelawney, we made... Mr. St. Joseph's, she said, cutting him off. We have very high standards here at Augustone Primary, and we do expect as a teacher to uphold these standards. Students must always be in proper uniform. Girls in their blue tunics with white shirts, and boys in their khakis with their shirts tucked in and with a black or brown belt. Miss Garrick, he boomed, there is right this very minute a little boy sitting down in my classroom, and it don't even look to me like he come to school to learn. It look to me like he come to school to sell brooms. I'm sorry, I'm not catching your meaning. Dreadlocks, Miss Garrick, dreadlocks. Like some dirty little African from the bush, and sitting right here in front of me, so brazen with his hairstyle. No. I will not tolerate it. When I was deputy head teacher at... What was the child's name? Mrs. Garrick asked. Ma'am, I never even stopped to ask the boy's name. I take one look at him, and my blood pressure boil up so high that I come straight to your office. The principal placed her spectacles back on her face and lifted her pen. She did not even look up at Mr. St. Joseph's as she said, quite curtly, I believe he is a Rastafari child, Mr. St. Joseph's. Good day. But I was made to understand when I accept this job. Stepping down. You might remember from my previous position as deputy head teacher that this was going to be a Christian school. Still looking down at her desk and beginning to fill in the overdue reports, Mrs. Garrick said once again, though even more slowly and sharply, Mr. St. Joseph's, good day. So Mr. St. Joseph's had turned on his heel and stormed out of the office, more angry than when he had come in. He shut the door of Mrs. G's office with exactly enough force to signal his anger, but not enough for it to be considered a slam. So now today, as he sits in the classroom, he remembers this and thinks it as partly the principal's fault, because she does not have good standards and did nothing about the situation when he raised it. But the principal has not turned up, and Mr. St. Joseph's is put out, perhaps in the way that a man who has battened up his house for a hurricane and has bought candles and a month's worth of tinned food is secretly disappointed when the storm passes without causing damage. No, I can't stay here anymore. I'm going home. Mr. St. Joseph says this aloud and starts to stand up, but once again the terror washes over him. He falls back into the chair and looks at his fingers. He flexes them open and closed, and then pushes them underneath his buttocks as if sitting on them will make them feel less guilty. Why you don't stop talking and misbehaving in class, eh? Why you don't stop talking? This is what he had shouted in Kaya's face, and he can still feel the small weight of that little boy as he had pulled him by his dreadlocks out of his chair, so surprisingly light. He felt he could have lifted the boy right up into the air. But even more surprising was the release of that weight, like a small pop, when he took a pair of rusty scissors and barbered the boy. He had not planned on doing such a thing. The idea had come into his head suddenly, like an inspiration, and then the deed had been done. It had surprised him how the clump of dreadlocks was suddenly in his hands like a slither of snakes. The class went silent. Mr. St. Joseph's did not know that 6-year-olds could hold their breath like that. Their eyes bulged as Kaya reached his small hands up to his head. When his hands came down onto jagged bits of hair and raw scalp, his own head suddenly made foreign to him. His eyes flooded, though no sound came out of his mouth as yet. You think I give you nothing to cry about yet, eh? You think I give you nothing to cry about? Mr. St. Joseph was affecting the supercilious tone of an adult reproaching a naughty child, but in the middle of his voice there was a trace of an emotion the children were not used to hearing in an adult. He was afraid. They were being ushered into a new understanding of the world, one in which adults were not always right. They were aware also of their own power in this moment, but only in a vague way, and they did not know what to do about it. Instinctively, they wanted to flash their hands and sing out, "Yes, no, Spanish Town." But who had ever sung such a song to a fully grown adult? It was a peculiar position to be in. Mr. St. Joseph's knew he had to do something quickly. He had to regain control. He turned to Kaya and shouted, "Get out of my classroom right now! Get out!" Kaya turned and seemed to wobble out of classroom 2B. Mr. St. Joseph's focused on the rest of the class. "2 times 2 is?" They did not respond. "2 times 2 is?" The children looked at each other, confused. "Then what happened?" Mr. St. Joseph chided. "A teaching a set of dunce picnic, eh? All of you dunce are what? You don't know what 2 times 2 is? Come man, 2 times 2 is?" It was a chant pulling them back towards him, and it worked. The students sitting near the front of the class lost their resolve and finally muttered the answer. 4. The children sitting right behind, not wanting to be left out, caught on and muttered it as well. And so this muttering of 4 stretched out like a wave from the front of the class to the back. Mr. St. Joseph's slammed his fist on the table and bellowed a last time. "I said 2 times 2 is?" It was so loud, even the classes nearby heard and wanted to answer. His entire class now shouted in unison, 4! Every lesson for the last hour of the day was taught in this almost Pentecostal fashion. Circles of damp spread from his underarms as Mr. St. Joseph's shouted and flailed, making sure to keep everyone's attention. But the day is done now. The students have gone home, and he is still sitting in the classroom, reliving the moment he has been trying to avoid. The pair of scissors is now lying innocently beside the cookie tin in which he keeps his blackboard duster and chalks. The dreadlocks are scattered on the floor. An occasional breeze brings them to life so that they really do look like snakes. Mr. St. Joseph's wonders, with an insight that is not common to him, if his world is falling apart. He wonders if, despite all his attempts to bring the same strict order to his life as he had done in Trelawney, things are not still unraveling, if he is not becoming undone. Augustown, Chapter 6. The strange and fastidious way of Mr. Joseph's have followed him all the way from his 2-bedroom country house in Trelawney to the single room he now rents in the backyard of a Mona bungalow. He continues to wake up at 15 minutes to 5 each morning, then stay under the sheets until the clock actually strikes 5, trying to resist the urge to take himself into his own hands and masturbate. At 5 a.m., he will light the flame of his Tilly lamp and, by its warm light, ready exactly 2 pages of the Bible, followed by 2 pages of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. That the 2 books contradict each other is not a thought that ever occurs to him. He understands very little of either text, but he is still making his way slowly and carefully through both, imagining that with each sentence read, he has improved himself in some profound way. After his morning reading, he will say a prayer, the long and earnest kind usually uttered by old women, and it is the kind of affectation which, from the lips of a young man, can never actually be sanctioned as effeminate, since it exists in the realm of the spiritual, but which nonetheless makes the grandfathers and uncles of such boys feel just a little uncomfortable. It is a sort of prayer never contained in the closet of one's mind, but one that spills out through the corners of ever-moving lips, and that is accompanied by hallelujahs and occasional sharp twitches. After his prayer, Mr. St. Joseph's will go to the bathroom, where a kerosene tin filled with water is waiting. He bathes carefully and efficiently, using no more than the one kerosene tin. The water is always cold and biting, having been collected the night before. But the kerosene tin, with its cold water, and the tilly lamp with its flickering flame are unnecessary. Mr. St. Joseph's has brought them with him from Trelawney, and there is no need for them now that he is living in the city. There is electric light in his room and hot running water in the bathroom. Yet, Mr. St. Joseph insists on keeping to his rural ways, imagining that the use of too many modern luxuries will lead to comfort, and that comfort will in turn lead to the weakening of his moral fortitude. Mr. St. Joseph's, after his bath, will observe himself in the mirror. He is always pleased to see a man fair of complexion, with a strong jaw, and soft curly hair that betrays a kind of mixed race heritage that is typical on islands like Jamaica. But if Mr. St. Joseph observes such things with pleasure and indeed pride, he also observes them with a great deal of imagination and fantasy. To everyone else, he is a man dark of complexion. His round face evidences no jawline whatsoever, and his extremely thick hair reveals that, if he is mixed with anything, it is with Ashanti and Yoruba. He is not an unattractive man, and yet he carries himself in an unattractive way. So strong and so desperate is his belief that he is the other than what he actually is, that he moves his body in awkward ways, squeezes it into the wrong clothes, gives it gestures and mannerisms and styles that he probably imagines are graceful, but which come across as clumsy and buffoonish. Take, for instance, the way he will vigorously oil and comb and brush his hair each morning, over to the left, over to the right, over to the left, over to the right, until he has formed the sharpest, neatest parting in the middle of his head. Well, as soon as he steps away from the mirror, patches of it will spring back up, his hair trying desperately to reform itself in its natural afro. And so by the time Mr. St. Joseph's has got to work, his hair always resembles an unevenly cut field, which in turn has earned him the nickname Pitchy Patchy Head. Mr. St. Joseph's, to put it simply, suffers from a deeply incorrect notion of things, and the only person who ever dared to tell him the truth, because it had become blindingly obvious to her one afternoon as she hid her vagina from his gaze, was his wife. In return for this small nugget of truth, the truth-teller received a broken nose. The brown-haired Mary Bridgelong met her future ex-husband when she had come to that age at which young girls, in order to assert themselves as independent and free-thinking, lose faith in just about everything associated with their upbringing. It is that season in which the religious become agnostics, the meat-eaters become vegetarians, and the fair-skinned and privileged of Jamaica, the class to which Mary Bridgelong belonged, become placard-bearing supporters of black power. For most girls, it is only a season. It passes. Important decisions must not be made during its short length. But no one could convince Mary of this. It was the 1970s, and so the 19-year-old had decided to lose faith in the fair-skinned, straight-haired world of her family, who, not by virtue of their wealth, which was hardly substantial, but by what in Jamaica would be called their brownness, were considered part of the petite bourgeoisie of Trelawney. Mary was not pretty, but she was indeed brown, and in Jamaica this counted for something. There were many eligible brown men she could have married. She could have had brown babies and established herself forever in a class slightly above the black majority. As for her choice among black men, that was almost limitless. It was curious then that Mary decided to take a fancy to the deputy head teacher of the basic school, Mr. Emmanuel St. Joseph's, who every morning and every evening walked by her gate towards the school where he worked. Perhaps it was simply that, heavy-set as he was, and with such a magnificent moustache, Mr. St. Joseph's reminded her a little of Marcus Garvey, whose writings she had begun to read. She found excuses to be out at the gate in the mornings when he walked by, and also in the evenings. They nodded hello to each other, but she found it hard to pull him into a deeper conversation. She began to help out at the school, started walking with Mr. St. Joseph's to the campus, and then back home to her gate in the evenings. Around him, she became her most flirtatious self. She found excuses to touch him on his knee or to fix his hair. Yet, he showed no signs that the attraction was mutual. This man, Mary had thought even then, is as dead to me as stone. This should have been a sign to her. Still, she was only 19 and more than a little foolish, and so Mr. St. Joseph's complete non-reciprocation only made her infatuation grow to unhealthy proportions. One evening, as they walked home together from the basic school, the air smelling of June plums and Scotch bonnet pepper, a radio in the distance playing a Justin Hines tune, Mary had felt moved to turn around to the deputy head teacher and kiss him on the lips. "Mr. St. Joseph's," she said to him as she withdrew her wet lips from his, "let us get married. I've been thinking about it for a while. I suppose you have as well." She said this last bit hesitantly. She looked up and then away from what seemed to be his stricken face. But she continued, before she lost her nerve, "There really is nothing to stop us. So what do you say?" Just like that, a full proposal, and not just for a date, but for marriage. Mary had decided she was in love, and perhaps she was. But it was with everything else. The 1970s, Black Power, dashikis, afros. She was in love with being young and having possibilities. She imagined that in the person of Mr. St. Joseph's, she would be marrying into the new black elite of the island. To the stunned Mr. St. Joseph's, Mary's proposal was proof of something he had always suspected about himself. His own fairness of skin, his own softness of hair, his own mixed gentility. Marriage to her would be an exaltation, at last, out of the blackness to which some unobservant people thought he belonged. He was trembling when he said, "Yes, Miss Bridgelang. Yes, of course, we should get married," as if the idea had always been in his head. After a few weeks of marriage to her future ex-husband, Mary could not help but notice the man's reluctance to have sex with her. After 2 years, they had done the deed a total of 7¼ times. She counted as a mere quarter the night when she had virtually raped him. She had straddled his limp penis and began gyrating before he finally threw her off, saying, "God damn it, Mary, I'm too tired tonight." Then he had rolled his large body over, turning himself away from her, trembling. It hurt Mary when she realized that Mr. St. Joseph's had no problem actually getting his manhood up. There were mornings when she, pretending to be still asleep, became aware of him, his eyes squeezed shut, masturbating right there beside her in the bed. After he came, he would sigh deeply, wipe the semen off of his stomach, and smear it against the wall. He would get out of bed then, light the tilly lamp, and begin to read the Bible. When she was 21, Mary St. Joseph's, nee Bridgelang, accepted that she had made a mistake. She decided as well that she was still young and still brown, and could still have almost any man she wanted, and some of those men were still giving her signals. She accepted that in the near future she would almost certainly divorce Mr. St. Joseph's, but she wouldn't rush into another marriage. No, she was wiser now. She would have to test drive the merchandise. Mary soon developed a whole schedule whereby a few different men would visit her during the day at the two-bedroom house in Trelawney, while Mr. St. Joseph's was out teaching at the basic school. In the end, it only surprised Mary that the man took so long to catch her in the act. Mr. St. Joseph's had come home early that afternoon and noticed a blue VW parked underneath a Julie mango tree outside his house. He noticed that a soft mango had fallen and burst on top of the car roof, and that flies were buzzing around the split orange flesh. He observed the flies for a moment, and then the car, and thought to himself that he had never seen it before. On the basis of such vehicular proof, other men in his position would have put two and two together. They would each have known the truth of their wife's infidelity right then, because, on a certain level, they had known it all along. From the moment the wives had stopped nagging them for sex and had begun strutting around with the languid elegance that is only achieved when a woman has grown used to being thoroughly satisfied in bed. But Mr. St. Joseph simply shrugged and walked towards the house. He let himself in and approached the bedroom, where the door was shut. Then he heard the muffled and deeply satisfied groans of his wife. These were sounds he had never been able to draw out of her in the 7 1/4 times they had done the deed. At last he understood what was happening. He eased the bedroom door open. At first the couple did not notice him. Mr. St. Joseph's observed the distinctly fair buttocks of a young man thrusting in and out of Mary's spread legs. He cleared his throat. The couple still did not hear or notice him. "You slut!" Mr. St. Joseph's growled. Even to his own ears this sounded pathetic. It was a sound made without conviction, as if, much like his clothes, he was trying on something else that didn't quite fit. But the pathetic sound at least did the job of announcing his presence. The couple scrambled in impossible directions, the man first crawling towards the bedpost, therefore pushing himself even deeper into Mary, who grunted even more deeply, before pulling himself out completely, accompanied by the wet slap of his cock against his torso. He stood up, and Mr. St. Joseph's tried to avert his eyes from the pink erection waving itself in front of him. The young man held his hands above his head. I'm sorry, sir. Please be calm." He was lean and tall. The hair all over his body was slicked down with sweat. He scraped his clothes from the floor and used them to cover his finally deflating erection. As yet, Mary had said nothing. She had only drawn the sheets up to cover her lower parts. I'm so sorry, the man continued, turning from Mary to Mr. St. Joseph's, unsure as to who deserved his apology more. He hurried out of the room. The front door of the house slammed, an engine started, then it grew faint as it headed off into the distance. Mary looked down at the sheets. Mr. St. Joseph's glared. "Slut!" he said once again, and this time managed it with more conviction, and so tried one better. "Rascalot slut!" But he was not used to cursing, and the word sounded forced on his tongue. Mary finally looked up, and this caused Mr. St. Joseph's to stumble backwards. He had expected to see embarrassment, even contrition in those eyes. He had been readying himself to exploit it, to use it as leverage in the new power he imagined himself holding. But the brown-haired Mary was looking at him with pity. "You stupid man!" She said it without any hint of malice. Indeed, she said it in a surprised sort of way, as one might when struck by a truth that had managed to escape one's notice for years. Mary gasped, and then spoke the truth again. dumbstruck by the obviousness of it all. "You're a stupid man. Oh Lord, that's it. You're just a very stupid man." She had believed so much in the politics of the 1970s, in black power, in the redress of old white wrongs, and she had read so much of Marcus Garvey that it had never occurred to her that a man such as Emmanuel St. Joseph's, heavy-set and with such a magnificent moustache, could possibly have been stupid. She saw now that just because history had wronged gentlemen such as him, and to precisely that extent had also ennobled them, it did not follow that they were all equally enlightened. She understood too that the failure of her marriage was more her fault than his, that a man as stupid as he was couldn't really be blamed. It was she who had made a fetish out of him. Mary looked up again at this man who was now both strange and understandable to her. "I'm sorry, Mr. St. Joseph's," she said. "It's just that you really are a very stupid black man." Ironic, really, that it was in this moment that Mary had come the closest to truly being married to Mr. St. Joseph's. For it was with this instinctiveness of a long-wedded spouse that she had finally found his trigger. To be called stupid was one thing. To be called black was quite another. He could not accept this callous demotion back into what he imagined he had been exalted out of. And that it had been sincerely meant, and was therefore possibly true, was enough to begin his unraveling. Mary had turned to look out of the window. She heard, just in time, the beastly grunt. She turned back to find her future ex-husband lunging towards her. He hit her with a closed fist. Her nose flattened under the weight of the impact. The nose sagged at an odd angle. Mary cried out as she held her nose in place. Mr. St. Joseph's was breathing heavily over her, feeling as close to tears as he had ever felt. Mary inexplicably felt the need to comfort him, but she didn't. "Mary, you betray me in the worst way today," Mr. St. Joseph said when he could finally manage a few words. "I have," she said quite quietly and matter-of-factly. Mr. St. Joseph's began to make a terrible sound then, dry and scratched sobs. His eyes became red, even though no water flowed from them. His pain was real, though. He did not understand why, or how, even with a broken nose, Mary could not bring herself to sound contrite or to shed a tear or two herself. That was almost a year ago. And though Mr. St. Joseph's has not really thought about it again, and certainly won't now as he sits in classroom 2B, the incident has still left a wound, a sense of shame and inadequacy that he will never shake, and with it an ache and a longing he can't quite name. He has left Trelawney. He does not think about the incident or much about his wife. He is not a contemplative or a reflective man. It is not his habit to ruminate on things. But perhaps the specific wound that Mary left on him is in fact a sense of himself, a self he does not care to know, but which he most certainly is. End of chapter 6.